why do you even need a board of directors? You're a nonprofit, you're doing good things. Let's talk about today why you need a board of directors and why it's so important, and what exactly is your board of directors going to do. So this is the first of a three-part series in something that I'm calling building a God-honoring board that makes you not want to go crazy. So this is part one, where we're talking about why boards exist and how your board should be made up. Part two is going to talk about a little bit on what you should keep in mind when you're adding board members. And then part three is talking about things to avoid with board members. Why in the world am I talking about this? If you are new to this channel, welcome. This is the Nonprofit Missionary Podcast. My name is Ken McQuiller, founder of Nonprofit Missionary, a grant writing and strategy organization that helps equip faith-based nonprofits with grant writing and funding strategies so that they can focus on seeking the kingdom of God first. So I have worked with board of directors for about 10 years, half of it as a staff member, half of it as a board member. So I have a lot of experience, as well as I have a master's degree in nonprofit administration. So I understand the structure and what is needed with board of directors. So let's start out with why you even need a board of directors in the first place. If you're talking about a faith-based nonprofit or a church, let's get into the legal stuff, because that's the more boring things. Because legally, in order to be a 501c3, your board of directors has to be the people that are leading the organization. When you file your paperwork, the 1023 and everything like that, the people that are legally in charge of the organization are the board of directors. They are the people that are, the buck stops with them. I know if you're looking at this and you're an executive director, you're like, well, I thought I was in charge. You are in charge of the day-to-day. But if someone were to file a lawsuit, or if there was a fine that had to be levied, it would be the board of directors' responsibility to take care of it, not necessarily the executive director. For example, let's say you got charged with excessive income, which I know some people are like, oh, well, must be nice. I know. But if you were to be charged with that, the IRS would actually fine each of the board of directors in some cases. Also, if you don't have proper insurance, there's a chance that your board of directors would get sued for their assets versus the organization if there aren't proper assets and all. So there's a lot of different things that could be that the board of directors are more responsible for from a legal perspective. But let's get away from the legal perspective, because that's annoying. We don't want to just talk about the legality of it. I want to give a couple of little pieces of encouragement, especially for those that are frustrated with their board of directors, where they feel like they are always trying to, these people don't understand me, they don't understand what we're doing, they're just here to tell me no. Proverbs 11:14, without wise leadership, a nation falls. Safety in having many advisors. Having a board of directors is good, even if it's just for the simple fact that your mission is bigger than just you. And it's important to have people around you that are helping you to grow, helping you to understand what works and what doesn't work. Even if it's frustrating, it's good to have other people that are speaking into your life, that are encouraging you, that are lovingly rebuking you in the right scenario. So I just want to encourage you, first off, that it's important to have a group of people that are helping you, because if you do it by yourself, it can be very lonely and it can be very challenging. Embrace the board of directors, because they're there for you. They're there to pray for you. They're there to help you figure out the things that you have a hard time figuring out. Whether it's fundraising ideas, whether it's programming, whether it's legal stuff, whatever it might be, they're there to help you. The other thing I want to encourage you with, and this is what I'm going to say in every episode of this three-part series, consider the board of directors' role as an opportunity for ministry. Sometimes, especially depending on what type of nonprofit you have, you might see what you do as ministry. I would encourage you, if you don't, you should, because whether you are helping kids in the after school hours, which is one of the nonprofits that I have been a part of for years, whether it's helping with the homeless, it's all ministry. And we usually see the programming aspect of it as ministry. But I've talked about it on previous episodes. Fundraising itself is ministry because you're helping, encouraging, and discipling people on their path to generosity. The board of directors is also a ministry position, not for the sake of advisors or anything like that, but they're there to pray for you. They're there to help you. They're there to be a good sounding board. They're there to make sure everything is being done with excellence. So don't see your board of directors as these people that are volunteering their time. No, they are in ministry with you to help you, to encourage you, to pray for you. And in return, as the executive director, you float as the liaison between the board and the staff. Pray for them too, like you'd pray for your staff. Because you guys are all in it together. You're all in this to try to help one another out. So when we reframe the role of the board of director and less of a, this is legal and I have to have it in order to be a legitimate 501c3, as opposed to looking at it as this is an opportunity for ministry, you can see it a lot differently and it can be a lot less frustrating. Once again, we're trying to give you a God-honoring board that makes you not want to go crazy. If you see it as ministry, it'll make you feel less crazy. It can also help in those times where it's hurting, where it's frustrating, because there are times where it's frustrating. There are times where it's like, man, they don't understand it. They don't get it. I have a hard time getting replies back on an email. It seems like no one cares until it's time to make a decision that gives them authority. I'm saying that because those are thoughts that I've had. And I want to encourage you. It can be very frustrating, but it is a ministry opportunity. It is not a legal position in order to legitimize your nonprofit. So see it that way. I want to encourage you to tell people at your board meetings that this isn't a rando position. This is also an opportunity for ministry. It's an opportunity to help pray for this organization, pray for the cause. And also, it's a good outlet to try to get difficult conversations had. Because yes, there are some times where it's very hard to navigate difficult situations, whether you're talking about a financial crisis that's happening, whether you're talking about a huge incident that happened at your nonprofit. We've seen some of those in ours, and I'm sure that churches or whatever, you've probably had incidents that are really challenging and really tough to deal with. It's really good to have a board of directors that's there for you, that can help you process it and help you navigate it in the best way. Now, how is your board supposed to look? Who should be on your board? What should your board of directors do? Now, there are some things that are this is what they have to do, whether it's setting salaries for your executive director, whether it's adopting a set of bylaws that works for your organization, approving minutes and financials, all of that stuff. I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about 4 different makeups of board of directors because it's important to recognize what it should look like. Now, as I go about each of these 4 areas, I want it to be clear that every board of directors should have all 4 of these aspects as a part of it, but it's not going to be, you're not going to have everything perfectly even and balanced. Everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. You've probably heard of love languages, physical touch, quality time, words of affirmation, all that. If you've read the book or if you've heard of it, everyone receives love in each of those 5 things, but one is their primary. So I want to highlight, maybe these are your primary board makeups, and these are the ways that you can identify your board. because I think when you identify your board properly, it can also alleviate some of the frustration that you might have. Because you see, okay, this is what my board is doing, this is probably what they should do, therefore, I may need to focus some of these other areas in other ways. For example, we're going to talk about advisory board as our first one. If your board isn't very advisory and helping you with that, your staff can be a good advisory at part of your organization, or your stakeholders, or your volunteers. I don't know what it might be, but let's talk about it. So there are 4 different types. There's others, but I want to talk about these 4 primary ones. The first is the advisory board. Your advisory board is exactly what it sounds like. The board exists to help give you advice. It goes back to that Proverbs verse that I started out with a little while ago. So your board of directors is there to help provide advice and insight. So in the board meetings, your focus is less on some of the other aspects and more on, these are some of the concerns, these are some of the visionary things, these are some of the fundraising things that I want to do. What do you think? And they're providing their opinion, they're providing their guidance and their insight. That is the primary aspect of an advisory board, advisory-led board. So who should be on boards like that? It should be people that you can get great advice from, and also people that you trust in that way. So if you're looking at a faith-based nonprofit, maybe it's other people in your congregation that know you pretty well. Should it be family members? That's a pretty strong conflict of interest. But if you have a friend that you've known for a long time, people that are familiar with your particular field. So if you're in the education field, people that have dealt with education. If you are working with workforce development, people that have dealt in the job training aspect, whatever you might be dealing with, having people that are familiar with that area can be very helpful. Having your pastor there might be very helpful. That is one type. Once again, every board should be a little advisory in what they do, right? Every board should be providing their insight and their advice. But maybe your board is primarily an advisory board. That's the first type. The second type is a fundraising board. And I know a lot of places, a lot of nonprofits, yeah, we need a fundraising board. We need a fundraising board, and that will help everything because we'll have all the money that we need. Yes, but maybe you need more of an advisory board to help you to figure out how to steward the people that you already have. Or maybe you need to hire a grant writer to help you with not the individual gifts, but the grants. You need a grant writer, nonprofitmissionary.com. Maybe you don't need a fundraising board. You need a working board that can help with some of the volunteer stuff that you don't have time for. So fundraising board, once again, it is what it sounds like. Fundraising board, their primary focus is raising funds for your nonprofit. So with a lot of these types of boards, you might have a particular fundraising threshold that you have to have in order to be a part of the board. So you have to have donated at least $5,000 in the calendar year. And if you don't do that within the calendar year, you are not part of the board anymore. So their focus is fundraising. So a lot of those board meetings, it's not as much about, this is the visionary stuff, but this is what fundraising needs to look like over the next 5 months, year, 2 years. These are the different fundraising events that we're planning. This is how we're going to strategize to make it happen. These are the things that we need to have in place in order to do what we do. And a lot of those board of directors, the constitution of that is people that are in the high dollar areas. So if you're talking about people that are businessmen or women, people that have done high level fundraising in the past. Once again, every board should have fundraising as a part of it. And if your board isn't fundraising, that is kind of a red flag. A lot of grant applications will ask you if your board is 100% giving. And if you answer no, they're usually asking you why. With our board of directors, we don't ask them to donate a certain amount. The way that I framed it is that you have to give something that is within your means at least once a year. So for some, that might be a $25 donation. For some, that should probably be about $2,500. But it doesn't matter what the amount is, the fact that you are invested into it. Because as a board member, you're representing the organization. And if you aren't giving to that organization, then why are you representing them? Does that make sense? So, fundraising board. That's where their focus is getting funds for the nonprofit. And a lot of the board of directors, they don't necessarily have to be related to the mission, but they are people that have networked with other people that have the proper funding. So that is the fundraising board. The third type of board is a governance board. A governance board focuses a lot on the governance of the organization, whether you're following best practices, whether you're following all of the state, local, and federal laws on how you are conducting yourselves. So this board is a lot more focused on making sure that you are doing everything properly. Once again, excellence is important, and maybe your nonprofit isn't as focused on governance, just because it's not as big of an issue for you, but maybe it's focused more on fundraising or advisory, whatever it might be. But it is important. Some nonprofits, that's their focus, is the governance of it, to make sure that everyone is doing things the right way, that everything is following best practices, that your bylaws are up to date and aligned with everything that's going on in the current world. And also, part of what a governance-led board is focused on is whatever your field is, that you are doing it properly. So we're in the after-school education space. Some of the things with a governance board would be making sure that all of your licensure stuff is in order, making sure that everyone has background checks and all of that. So a lot of those board meetings would be focused on making sure that everything is following best practices, and if there are any significant changes in the laws of your state or whatever, they would make sure that you're following that. And a lot of the people that would make up boards like that would be more on the legal end. So you're talking lawyers, people that have been around in boards for a long time that know things like Robert's Rule of Order and all of those type of things. People that have been maybe seasoned in your field so they know how to navigate the licensures and whether or not you're allowed to do what you're doing. Because let's say you're in the after-school space. Having a child care license is important, because if someone comes up and rolls up from the Department of Child and Family Services, it's going to be an issue if you don't have the proper licensure, if you don't have the proper paperwork in place. Governance board, that is kind of their focus, is making sure everything is done legally and within order. Once again, it's important to have that regardless of the type of makeup of your board. But governance boards, that's their primary focus. The last one I want to talk about is a working board. And if you're talking these small nonprofits, especially startup nonprofits, they probably have more of a working board. So what is a working board? A working board is exactly what it sounds like. It's a board that is more engaged in the work. They might be the ones that are a little bit more focused on doing the work itself. So they're kind of like your lead volunteers. Because especially a lot of the smaller and a lot of the startup nonprofits, you either have an unpaid executive director that is volunteering their time, or the only paid person is the executive director. And with a lot of nonprofits, there's so much work that goes into it. And the group of volunteers that helps is usually first the board. So they're the ones that are helping usher in everything that's needed. So that, when it comes to your working board, a lot of times they might hold the dual title of they're also the operations director, or they help with finances or whatever. So those people, a lot of the working board is people that are already involved in the organization itself. Now, the biggest caution that I would say with that is you want to be careful with pay. Because if you are getting paid and also on the board, we'll get a little bit more into that with conflict of interest in part 3. That can be a little bit of a red flag from the IRS. And you don't want to get into any issues there. So we'll talk about it in more detail, but when it comes to working boards, sometimes you have to be careful of the pay and who's getting paid and how they're getting paid and all that. So those are the 4 types. You have your working board, you have your governance board, you have your fundraising board, and your advisory board. Here at the coffee shop, I feel like we have more of an advisory board because fundraising for us isn't as big of a deal as for other organizations because we do get earned income from our coffee sales. Governance is not as big of an issue either. And yes, they work. They're part of the working board. If we're putting on events and stuff, our board's showing up and they're showing out. However, it's not as big of a deal as the advisory piece of these are the things that we're looking at. These are the things that I'm praying about and thinking this is where I think God wants to lead us. And I need you to help me to make sure that it's going in the right direction. Take a look at your board this week and think it through. Are you more focused on fundraising? Are you more focused on governance, working, advisory? And my whole point in this is that none of these things are bad. And there's not a particular way that you necessarily need your board of directors to look like. Now, if you want to be more of a fundraising board, if you want to be more of a working board, that's something to bring up, but also love on and appreciate the people that you have. And understand that where you are now is where you are now. And sometimes, yes, that can be frustrating, but I think it can also be freeing because you're trying, if you're, man, I thought that my board was a fundraising board and it should be a fundraising board, but then you realize it's an advisory board. Maybe you'll feel a little bit different the next time that they're giving more advice versus you want to talk about fundraising. Maybe you're, man, I don't need my board to keep helping and to keep volunteering. I need them to help me with some of the legal governance stuff. If you realize that your board is more of a working board, you'll see it differently, and it can give you a different mind frame and a different mindset as you're going about this. Because my point isn't to say you need to do this with your board or your board should look more like that. My point is that it can be very frustrating to work with a board. Once we recognize what type of board we have, then it can be easier for us to figure out how to interact with them and how to prepare for those board meetings. So with that said, I really hope that you enjoyed this. This is going to be a 3-part series. I want to do a quick side note. This is my segment called Notes to Myself, something that I've been thinking about recently. And I'm recording this on October 23rd, so Halloween is right around the corner. And I've been seeing a lot of stuff about whether or not Christians should celebrate Halloween. And I have my opinions, and honestly, that's not really the point of this. My point is I realize how polarizing social media can be and how people really have lost the sense of nuance. And this is my thoughts. This is how I'm feeling. Have some nuance, please. And I'm not saying you don't. You might not. But I think it's so important to have the mindset that it's not this way or that way. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And as we go about our lives, I think it's important to say, have that nuance. Be willing to say, yes, the person that I watch and gain a lot of my worldview from, they're not perfect. And there are probably aspects that I don't agree with. But not everyone on the other side is wrong. Because this also goes with politics too, because I've seen it a lot, especially since Charlie Kirk's assassination, where I kind of see one of two viewpoints. Charlie Kirk is the most amazing person in the world, and should be a saint and should be revered for it, or Charlie Kirk is the worst person that I've ever seen. And I don't think either of those are true. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think there's less of conversations of, I don't think he was a great man, but maybe there were some things that he said that were good. I don't really see either of those. The same with Halloween. Either you are an amazing Christian because you're following and celebrating Halloween because you're reaching out to the world, or if you are celebrating Halloween, you're basically a demon worshiper. And I don't understand where we've lost nuance and where we can say, yeah, we have to appreciate other people's views, even if I don't agree with them. I always say when it comes to politics, I hope people follow politics like they watch sports. We're passionate about the same thing. And yes, I don't agree with you that you're a Red Sox fan, because I'm a Yankees fan. But we can agree to disagree. And I can tell you why the Yankees are better because of all the different things, but I'll leave it at that. So please have nuance this week. Don't automatically think that someone is 100% wrong or 100% right. They're probably somewhere in the middle. So with that said, that's part one of building a God-honoring board that you don't go crazy in. Part two, next episode, we'll talk a little bit more about when we are adding board members, what are things that we should be looking for? How should we do it? What are some tips and things of advice in order to avoid crazy stuff? Because there's some crazy stuff that can happen with board of directors. So in the meantime, thank you guys for tuning in. Please subscribe. Also, if you want some one-on-one support, nonprofitmissionary.com. We can set up a sales call. We can talk about some things. So until next time, stay focused, stay faithful. God bless.